Hiya, it's Kbex, welcome back to my channel. This time I thought I'd talk about editing and the choices that I make when I have finished but not finished writing my story. So as we all know, when you have finished writing your story, you haven't actually finished. You have to go back and polish it and check it. So first and foremost, you'll do a developmental edit. This means that you will take a step back and look at the broader picture. First off, I will look at my opening and my ending of the story and see whether they work together in tandem, whether there is some sort of development or change that I wanted to happen from the beginning to the end. Because if your opening and your ending aren't working out, then there's not really much point, in my opinion, in editing the rest of the story. So what I do is I read the opening and the ending of my story to see if they kind of work together. Have I made my character progress from A to B in the way that I wanted? In your opener, there is a lot of pressure to keep people engaged, and is there a sense of enigma, but not too much enigma, otherwise people won't know what exactly they're supposed to be invested in. Do they know enough about your character to be interested and to follow them along until the end of their journey, no matter how long or short that story is? And then your ending, whatever enigmas you've put in place, is there at least some sort of answer by the end? Even if it's a horror or some other story where there's supposed to be, say, a cliffhanger, has your reader got enough to still be satisfied by the time that they're finished? The second thing that I do is I check for how well the paragraphs in between flow. So from paragraph 1, where you've hooked your reader in, through to paragraph 2, where hopefully you've given them a few more breadcrumbs and have made them want to follow you along on this story, whether it's a romance or a horror or whatever. Have you given the reader enough incentive to keep going? And does that second paragraph follow the breadcrumbs your first paragraph left without giving too much away, so that your reader is still invested? Next, what you're going to want to do is check for the tone throughout the piece. Obviously, this is a little easier to do if it's a shorter story. Is the tone of the opener consistent through to the middle, which honestly, the middle of stories tend to get a bit saggy. Of course, your overall tone is going to depend on what is happening in the story, and generally you want it to build in anticipation by the end, or build to some sort of crucial development by the end, and that will probably shift your tone. I would say in my own writing, the hardest bit for me is going back and checking the tone in the middle of the story to make sure that the tone is consistent, but also I suppose that it marries well with the pace, and that people aren't going to be put off by the pace and tone in that middle section of your story. Next is another developmental check, where you take a step back and you check to see if, like me, you have a habit of using the same words and phrases throughout your piece over and over again. It might be obviously that you've done that on purpose, which is fine, but often we tend to have accidental ones as words and phrases that we repeat over and over. I cannot tell you how many times I've read through a piece and my character is biting their lip or chewing the inside of their cheek, and so now I'm aware of that. I purposely go back and I will edit out, or at least reduce the amount of times that is happening. It's only after I've done all of these developmental checks that I will then move on to sentence level checks, where obviously you want to start checking your grammar. Now, of course, that will also include the tone and repetition and things like that we was talking about, but it's going to be more down to the sentence level rather than looking at the overall big picture, because you should have already done that. And at sentence level, does that individual sentence work? Does it actually have to even be there? A common mistake that I still make, and many people do, is to use too many words to say the same thing. We need to be more concise, and so wherever you can, cut the fat out. This is why I think that I still enter competitions with a shorter word count than I like to work with sometimes, or I will make sure that my prompts that I'm following for my writers group don't exceed 500 words, because once you've committed to that word count, you've got to make sure you trim the fat and tell that story as concisely as possible. So if you don't currently work to a word count, maybe you should consider in the future just trying it, because it really does hone that skill of cutting out the bits you don't need. And of course, the final check that I would make is the readability, because it's easy in your head to think that something sounds great, and then when you read it out loud, it doesn't sound quite how you imagine it would do. So I know I said this in my last video, but I really do encourage you to read out your work. Maybe not if it's an entire novel, perhaps just do a chapter or a scene or whatever. But if it's a short story, go ahead, record yourself if you need to, or do, perform it to somebody else, because of the minute you start saying it out loud, those sentences that were not quite as sharp as they should be, you'll begin to trip up on them and you'll start to see where you need to make some more edits. And that's it. They're my tips for editing your story, whether it be a short story, a novella or novel. All of these are going to be equally important. If it is a novel or novella, you will want to take it bit by bit, scene by scene or chapter by chapter, kind of take it easy. But with a short story, it's still important to go through these edits and then leave it for a bit and come back and just check that you're happy with the choices you've made. There are pieces that I've written a year, 2 years, 3 years ago, where I go back and there are choices I would not have made today in my writing. Just remember, we're always improving. Before you send off that piece of writing to a lit mag or a competition, just remember to give it another once over, because you don't know what changes that today's version of you would make that the past version of you hadn't even considered. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Why don't you comment down below with your own editing ideas? Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Oh, that's gone cold.